In regard to the training of a choleric, then, work on excessive pride, work on excessive desire for control, excessive work, and also work on not being abrasive with others. Lastly, the training of a choleric child. Of course, what I've said about the training of a choleric in general applies. And just to add to that, I really stress to those who have choleric children to remember that the child needs to be trained right from the start in humility. This is often difficult because the choleric child very often is so smart, so talented, and so it's easy to praise and to flatter. The choleric child is an extrovert, so they demand attention. They're on stage, and they get attention and praise and flattery, but it's not good for them at all. If the child is smart, it's because God made them smart. If they're handsome, it's because God made them handsome. But when they are kind, or generous, or obedient, then praise them for using well what God has given them. A choleric child is naturally bright, and so they can at an early age be taught the difference between God's gifts and their use of them. They can learn very quickly what is praiseworthy, looking good or being good, being smart or being virtuous. And that's why choleric children should be taught that right away. You will be praised for virtue. You will be praised for being good. As far as looking good, thank God for it. And as far as being smart, thank God for it. Today we have this excessive idea about self-esteem. In modern jargon of education, it's constantly, and it's in the books, in the whole educational system. Not to say, of course, that we should not praise the children. We should. But they should be praised for the things that they will be rewarded for eternally. Praise them for the good deeds they do. Praise them for when they share. Praise the choleric for when he's humble. Don't praise him instead because he dances around and is haughty with his friends or is snobby with his brother or sister. This idea needs to be constantly reiterated because the choleric child quickly and easily attributes any and all greatness to himself. The sooner you start instructing the choleric child in humility, the better. The choleric child is a natural leader, an organizer, and a doer. If well trained, the child will be a great asset to family and to society. The choleric can become the greatest of saints, and they can do the greatest deeds for God and man. But the untrained choleric child is like having dynamite in the home, with their anger and with their excessive desire for praise and for having things their way. Teach the choleric to control his temper from the time he's an infant. He should be corrected. Temper tantrums should not be allowed. Curb the child's manifestations of haughtiness and snobbery. Don't laugh at this as if it's cute. All too often I find that a lot of times today, children are laughed at and even praised for being little snobs. And they shouldn't. It's a repulsive quality. And yet, very often, adults find it so cute. Listen to the way he said this to his mother or father. And I listen and think, would you mind if I ask him to bend over while I spank him for you? But it's an odd thing today. It's like, when a child looks at his mom and, says some snotty little remark, a lot of times parents go, oh, thank you. Oh, my goodness. You're going to have a little Frankenstein on your hands in a few years. And it won't be cute then. It won't be cute. And so you have to realize what you say to them is cute when they're little. They're still going to do when they're teenagers, and then it won't be cute. And so the choleric child should not be praised or laughed at or encouraged to be snobby, to be contemptuous, to be flippant. They should be corrected for that. The choleric child requires firmness when dealing with them. Since he is strong, he will naturally strive to rule, to run, to dominate the house. Mom and Dad are no exceptions to his testing. Some 4-year-olds rule their whole house. Mom, Dad, and siblings. No one wants to battle the choleric child, so everyone gives in. You see this sometimes, that a child will throw a temper tantrum. The child will say, I want that. And dad says, no, but I want it. I want it. And they throw themselves on the floor, and then mom says, can you go get it for him? Can you go get it for him? And they run to get whatever the child wants because the child's having a temper tantrum on the floor. Or the choleric child sits and pouts and shifts this great guilt. You see, they can do it from the time they're little. The choleric child says, I want that book, and I want it now. No, you can't have it. And then they sit down, and sometimes they'll look up and say, you don't belong to me. Smart, huh? 3 or 4 years old. And what happens? The mother walks around feeling such feelings. I really wanted my child by not giving him this book. And there that child sits watching it. Just watching, until the mom gives in. The child looks at the book and tosses it aside. He didn't want the book. He wanted control. He wanted control. Now, parents may think, well, that's ridiculous. My child's not that evil. Your child is not that evil. Your child is human. The original sin, the effects of original sin, the effects of his own natural temperament, all the wounds of original sin that he carries about with him. And you have this little small child with all these passions booming in him. And you have the job of taming him. And if you let that little 4-year-old sit there and play games with you with guilt and pity and fear of his temper tantrums, he is going to drag you around with his passions. And the whole house will be sitting on the edge of the couch, waiting for little choleric to say what he wants next. And it's no exaggeration. It really isn't. It's amazing sometimes. Just flying on the plane, sometimes I'll see a little child sitting on the plane, ruling mom and dad who are there sweating copiously because his child wants this and wants that. He drags them through the plane and he demands water and then he demands something else. So it is no exaggeration that a child, especially a choleric child, because they're very bright, from the very start, the choleric child needs the parents to take control and not be manipulated by his games and his ways that he has, but instead he needs you to correct him. Don't feel guilty because you deprive him of something he wants. Don't feel pity because he sits in a corner and has little tears coming down his pretty little face, but instead ignore it, as hard as it is, and pretend, because he's watching you. He wants to see it. It's affecting him. Pretend it doesn't affect you, and sure enough, he'll get out of that lonely corner. And as long as he sees that you're looking over like, he's going to sit there and have a lot of fun pulling on your heart. Rule his passions so that eventually he can rule them. See, as I mentioned before in another conference, the little ones have all those passions, but they don't have the controls. That's your job as a parent. You control them. Eventually, by habit, you hope they will then know how to control them because you have made those passions submissive to reason and to faith. And those are the things that you give them as parents. Faith and reason to rule those passions. And so you must call the shots in the home. You must rule that choleric child and teach him there will be no temper tantrums. And you will not get what you want when you throw a temper tantrum. Reward does not come from that kind of conduct. And they must be taught that. Otherwise, they're going to run their whole life that way. They're going to rule their whole life with passion because you trained them instead to get what they want because of passion. Be firm. Take a stand. Don't give in. The impudence, stubbornness, and pride that are so natural for a choleric child has to be taken in early and attacked resolutely. Attack it with firmness, as I said, because they respect firmness, but not passion. Be reasonable. Make your orders irrevocable. If you say something, stick with it. It's not good to say, I'm going to pull off your arm, because you can't do that. Those kind of, well, I'm going to pull off your arm, does nothing, because the kid knows it's ridiculous. But if you say, you are not going to go outside after lunch, you are not going to that party if you keep this up. Now, if they know, oh yeah, but when I cry tonight, you'll let me, then your threat will have nothing to back them up. So you do have to be careful. That's why a lot of times at school, when I'm not ready for something that happens, I usually say, you won't believe what's going to happen to you. Later I have to back it up by having to do something. But, those generalities like, you will be sorry. But you do have to make them sorry. You still have to back that up. But at least that gives you time to figure out what you really want to do with them. But you do have to back those up. It's very important. But you shouldn't just throw things out. Or sometimes you do say, you will not go to the party tomorrow. And afterwards you think, oh, that was excessive. The answer is, okay, it was excessive, but it won't kill him. What will kill him is if I give in. Because if I give in, he's going to think my threats are always worth nothing. And that does happen sometimes. A parent or a teacher sometimes gives some statement and they realize, oh, I wish I had done that. But they have to stick with it. For the sake of the child, in the long run, it will be better. For choleric, it's very important because they hear every word. They know what you said, and they will remember if you back down or not. And so you must be reasonable, make your orders irrevocable. Be calm but very strong with a choleric child. Place high ideals before him. The choleric has an appeal for nobility. He has a taste for the daring and the difficult. He has a natural desire for that which is honorable and noble. And so it's good to place before them the nobility and the greatness of serving God, of loving God. Place before them great saints, great martyrs, the saints who did great, great things for God. That is appealing to a choleric because cholerics naturally appreciate greatness and strength. And so it is good to show choleric children that the greatest people are the saints. Greatest people are not your sports stars, your movie stars, and your car drivers, or your wrestlers. Those are not the greatest people. Place before them the nobility, the greatness, the bravery, and the courage of the saints. Then the choleric child will aspire for that because you taught them that's what's great. That's what's noble. If the only thing that's praised in the house is a moronic football player or a fat wrestler, then that's what your child's going to desire to be. Because that's what you urge them to be. That's what's honorable, especially choleric. They want to be what is praised as great, what is praised as noble. And they can see the nobility of the great saints who truly did great things for God. The nobility of those who serve God well. Place that before them so that they can have that to aim for. It is hard sometimes to raise choleric children because they are strong, especially if the parents are not, one or both parents are not of choleric temperament. It's even harder because that choleric is usually very strong. But stick to it. Be firm and strong. And make them respect you. The choleric will obey and respect you more if you demand respect of him. And if you show him that you're the boss. Because then you will be able to see a real Saul changed into Paul. You can see someone like the great St. Paul, who had such a fiery nature and such a strong determination, at first to do evil, but later to do the greatest of deeds, and who went through so much for the love of God. You see there a perfect example of a choleric nature that was fiery and strong and determined. And you see it in its worst, and you see it at its best in the great St. Paul. And so in conclusion, I urge those raising choleric children to be strong because the result is worth the efforts. And I urge those who are choleric themselves to be honest. Be honest about yourself and persevere in your efforts to correct yourself because the result will be very great. Some of the greatest of saints were choleric. Besides the great St. Paul, you have St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Jerome, Blessed Philippine Duchesne, and St. Francis Xavier Cabrini. The choleric is capable of accomplishing the greatest tasks for God and man. high ideals and great thoughts to motivate him, the choleric can endure the greatest sufferings, the greatest sacrifices and penances for the love of God and man, and to endure them as if they are nothing, because he has such a single-minded determination to accomplish a goal. And when his goal is to love God, nothing else matters. With virtue, he is magnanimous. He is noble. He has the independence that's needed to stand alone. He has control when others are losing their control. And he has the leadership that instills confidence in others. Persevere if you are choleric in your strides for perfection. Perfection not for yourself, but for the love of God. Because the choleric can accomplish the greatest things for the love of God and can become one of the greatest saints. Are there any questions? Clerics, of course, understand everything.